Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Sandy Mislowitz. I'm the Executive Director of the Capital District Transportation Committee. Thank you for joining us today for this workshop on our upcoming Unified Planning Work Program. The draft document is out for public review. And today we're going to provide you some highlights of what's in our work plan for the coming year and how it was developed. So I will begin with sharing my screen. Hopefully you are seeing the PowerPoint presentation. And as I said, the draft Unified Planning Work Program has been in development now since the fall. Well, it doesn't seem to be wanting to advance my slides. Hold on just a second. My apologies. Huh. Still not advancing my slides. Let me move to a different screen. Interesting. There it goes. They're just very delayed. Sorry about that, folks. So as a reminder of who we are, the Capital District Transportation Committee is the metropolitan planning organization for the capital region, and we serve the counties of Albany, Rensselaer, Saratoga, and Schenectady, with the exception of the town of Moreau and the village of South Glens Falls. And as a metropolitan transportation planning organization, we have basically been legislated to have three key functions. We prepare a metropolitan transportation plan, which is the regional transportation plan for the capital region. It's a 30-year plan, or 20 to 30-year plan, updated every 5 years. It's currently known as New Visions 2050. We're also required to develop a capital program of transportation projects that use federal funds. It is referred to as the Transportation Improvement Program. This is updated every 2 or 3 years. The current TIP is for the time period of 2019 through 2024. The fiscal year for the Transportation Improvement Program begins October 1st and ends September 30th of the following year. And we're in the midst of updating our TIP for the 2022-2027 time period. And the third required document is the one we'll be talking about today, which is the Unified Planning Work Program. Our UPWP is required to be either a 1 or 2 year plan that contains all of the CDTC planning activities and task budgets, with particular emphasis on those that involve federal transportation planning funds. The draft that we'll be reviewing today is for the 2022-2023 fiscal year. Interestingly, it's on a different time frame than the TIP. Our planning funds operate on the state fiscal year, which begins April 1st of 2022 and ends March 31st of the following year. And let me advance my slides. I'm not sure why the lag is going on, and I really do apologize for that. So what is the UPWP? The UPWP is essentially, again, it describes all of our planning tasks in terms of who performs the planning work, whether it be our staff or a consultant. What are the time frames for completing the work? Is it a 6-month project? Is it a multi-year project? Is it an ongoing, continual project? What is the cost, and what are the fund sources? And each of these line item descriptions in our UPWP describes the planning work to be undertaken and provides a description of each task. And a lot of this is coming directly from our principles and policies in our New Visions Regional Transportation Plan, as well as input from others. Again, this is federally required, and we primarily have as fund sources our federal highway and FTA planning funds. So as I said at the beginning, the process for developing this UPWP began in the fall of 2021. At our September policy board meeting, our policy board approved a new approach to developing our unified planning work program and allowed for the solicitation of project proposals from communities and other member agencies of CDTC by CDTC's planning committee. And in October, we held a planning committee meeting where we reviewed and approved the solicitation material and issued that solicitation or the call for projects really in October. October 21st, we held a workshop for the public to understand what we're asking for and how folks can apply for planning funds. And then we had a proposal deadline of November 24th. The way we developed the solicitation material was we developed 3 broad categories of planning projects for which we would be taking in requests for funding. The first is through our traditional community and transportation linkage planning program, which is an ongoing strategic planning program we've had here at CDTC for over 20 years, in which we partner with local governments on municipal complete streets projects or zoning code changes or trail development or some kind of corridor analysis related to transportation. Those projects are often led by consultants with a hefty public engagement process and are really the key drivers for accessing grants by local governments for implementation projects, whether they be capital projects or other resources for the local government. The second group of projects we termed the regional plan implementation projects. So these would be larger scale projects that implement some aspect of our regional transportation plan, New Visions 2050. And the third category was community planning technical assistance projects. So these are smaller scale projects that can be done in a couple of weeks, generally with staff time, in which we would work with a local government on a local planning issue. It could be a safety problem on a roadway. It could be exploring options for routing a sidewalk through a community. There's a range of things we can do with technical assistance. And this call for projects, as I said, developed and generated several proposals, which we'll talk about. The approach on the solicitation related to the fact that the proposed projects had to meet, obviously, the eligibility requirements for federal funds as defined by the FAST Act. Mentioned how they had to further the goals and policies of New Visions 2050. This describes the cost the cost maximum for each project category. So in the linkage program, for example, we reserved up to $200,000 for planning work specific to that program. The maximum request could be $100,000. In the regional plan category, we had a maximum request of $150,000. And for the community planning technical assistance program, we had a maximum value of $30,000. The solicitation resulted in the 6 proposals you're seeing on your screen. 5 of them are dedicated, we're requesting funds through the community and transportation linkage planning program, and 1 requested funding through the regional plan implementation program. The regional plan implementation project was in the town of Hoosick in the Rensselaer County, looking at doing some asset management planning for their town-owned roads. We had proposals from the city of Schenectady to undertake a Albany and Crane Streets linkage study, looking at a sub area of the city in the Mount Pleasant neighborhood. We had a request from the city of Saratoga Springs to undertake a complete streets study on Church Street. We had the town of Wilton submitted for an update of a previously completed linkage program plan on exit 16 in the town of Wilton, in the area of Ballard Road. The town of Brunswick applied for funding to support a corridor study of Hoosick Road. They refer to Hoosick Road, but New York State Route 7 through the town of Brunswick. And the Village of Colony also requested a feasibility study for a complete street on Sand Creek Road. These 6 proposals requested $370,000 in federal planning funds, a little more than what we had available for programming. So we reviewed and evaluated these proposals in the month of December. At the same time in December, the state DOT issued the guidance and funding allocation estimates for our Unified Planning Program, which is how we realized that we didn't have funding to do everything that was proposed in the solicitation, along with all of our ongoing activities. But as you probably heard, we also, the federal government also passed the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law, also known as the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, or the IIJA. And that actually increased our available resources for planning funds for dedicated to CDTC, particularly on the federal highway side, the FHWA side, where we increased our resources by 36%. It's a little more modest on the FTA side with only a 1% increase. But despite that increase in funding, we were already tightly budgeted as it was. It did bring some additional resources for planning, but there's also more requirements on our planning, which we'll talk about. So the evaluation team met to evaluate these 6 proposals for funding. And what you're seeing is the ranking of how we here on the CVTC staff, the evaluation team was here on the staff. And we were recommending 4 projects for funding. The first one is the Hoosick Roads Transportation and Infrastructure Planning Project. The next one is the Albany and Crane Streets Linkage Study. The next is the Sand Creek Road Complete Street Feasibility Study. And the final one is the Hoosick Road Corridor Study in the town of Brunswick. The linkage share happens to add up to that amount we set aside, which was $200,000 of federal funding, plus the town of Hoosick project added another $30,000. So $230,000 of our Unified Planning Work Program funds will be dedicated to these 3 projects next year. The proposals that weren't selected for funding will be encouraged to apply for technical assistance in 2022. So that brings us to January, in which we prepared the draft Unified Planning Work Program document. The document is been heavily revised for this year, and we're required to address the federal planning factors in law, as well as how each task relates to our New Visions 2050 principles. The summary on your screen represents a bullet list of the general topics that are considered in the federal planning factors, ranging from supporting economic vitality to increasing the safety of the transportation system, increasing and promoting energy conservation, preserving the existing transportation system, improving resiliency, etc. So these planning factors on the federal side, these 10, are specifically addressed in each of the tasks we had in our Unified Planning Work Program document for this year. In addition, the Federal Highway Administration and the Federal Transit Administration identified new planning emphasis areas that, while not required to be addressed by CDTC in the Unified Planning Work Program, we took it upon ourselves to make sure that we at least touched upon all of these topics in one of our work tasks for the coming year. These include tackling the climate crisis and transitioning to clean energy and building resiliency into the transportation system, addressing equity and justice 40 in transportation planning, continuing our commitment to complete streets. You'll note at the bottom of the screen that the new Bipartisan Infrastructure Law now requires 2.5% of MPO planning funds to be reserved for complete streets planning. CDTC has typically gone above that in past years and will continue to go above that level. But now all MPOs around the country are required to plan for complete streets. We also have resources for public involvement, coordinating with the U.S. Department of Defense, which includes facilities in our region, such as the Waterville Arsenal and the National Laboratory up in the town of Milton. We also have to coordinate with federal lands, including the Saratoga National Historic Park and other federal lands in the region. And the final two topic areas we address are planning and environmental linkages, which is a program that really looks at the environmental impacts of a potential major investment project before it enters the NEPA, or the National Environmental Protection Act planning process. And it really sets the stage for those major capital investments that might need to be undertaken in the region. And data and transportation planning, focusing on data collection. So as I mentioned at the beginning, along with the solicitation, we gathered input to develop the UPWP tasks through community meetings and our CDTC advisory committee meetings. We reviewed our planning documents, including the New Visions Transportation Plan and the major regional plans that were developed as a result of that, such as the Regional Freight Plan, the Local Road Safety Action Plan, our Capital Trails Plan. And we also looked at CDTC staff identified needs that have emerged from conversations with state, local, and regional agencies and organizations. And of course, those items that are required of the MPOs in federal law. That brings us to February, where we reviewed the draft Unified Planning Work Program with our planning committee at the beginning of the month. We approved the addition of new projects from the UPWP solicitation, so those 4 I mentioned previously. We also approved the draft UPWP and released it for public comment. So this is the workshop that's allowing us to tell you what's in the document. And obviously we're here today for the virtual workshop. So what's in the UPWP? So what's actually, what are our planning tasks for the upcoming year? This first category of projects we refer to as our program support and administration. This really refers to some of our federally required elements, just in terms of running an MPO, encouraging public participation, how we operate our office, how we manage and run our planning committee and policy boards, which of course really are, the policy board is the CDTC, and as well as management, administration of some statewide contracts we have, particularly for the New York State AMPO. That's a statewide association of all 14 MPOs here in New York State. We also have support for the technical assistance program, which for those of you listening, if you work for a local government or you're a citizen, you can utilize this technical assistance program at a local government level on an on-demand basis. If there's a particular transportation issue you'd like to have reviewed or be looked at in some way, we ask local governments to apply. Citizens can contact their local government to encourage them to apply. And this line item supports that planning work. The linkage program administration and support is tied directly to management of the consultants that will work on the 3 new projects, in addition to some ongoing projects that we have from the previous year that are carrying over into this current fiscal year, or this coming fiscal year. The next category of projects is in the area of general development and comprehensive planning. This topic area really is sort of tied to our data collection efforts and how we display and organize data in our geographic information system. It also is the area where we download and analyze census data and distribute them to the public via the Capital Region Indicators website, which is a CDRPC, or Capital Regional Planning Commission hosted website, under which you can download a wide variety of data at a municipal level. We also collect pavement condition inventory, traffic volume data, trail data, all sorts of data can be collected in all of these tasks. The next topic and category is long-range transportation planning. And this is and what we mean by system level is these are sort of the things that are impacting the region overall. So the big picture items, if you will. STEP model refers to our regional travel demand model. We put a lot of resources into maintaining the STEP model. which is used by a lot of developers, consultants for developers, state DOT to look at future growth in traffic on Capital Region roadways. We also have our climate change initiative, which is a new initiative for this year, in which we intend to look at transportation's contribution to greenhouse gas emissions in the region and planning on reducing our share, that transportation sector's share of greenhouse gas emissions. We have resources for infrastructure planning. This is also where we included the Town of Hoosick Asset Management Plan. We're constantly doing workshops and promotion of New Visions 2050, and we'll be starting to think about how we're going to update New Visions in the coming years. And performance-based planning refers to some of federally required performance measures that we have to track and adopt here at CDTC, ranging on how many fatalities are reduced in the region, to what is the reliability of the transportation system from a time management perspective. At a project level for long-range regional transportation planning, we have a couple of specific items that relate to our operations and congestion management planning, our regional signal timing program, which is a new program that we hope to initiate. It's been delayed the last couple of years due to the COVID crisis, but we really hope to work with local governments on improving signal timing in the region, and we'll be hiring a consultant to help carry out that task. We'll also be updating our congestion management plan as part of this, which will hopefully lead us to furthering our congestion management policies here in the region. Shorter range transportation planning, and I'm sorry, there just noticed there's a typo in the planning word. These refer to some of our ongoing activities that we put a lot of staff time into on topics of regional interest. Complete streets, we expect, again, as I mentioned at the beginning, we have to spend 2.5% of our PL funds, our planning funds, on complete streets planning. So we'll be making a continued investment in complete streets. Freight planning is an ongoing activity. We're in the midst of a parking study for trucks right now. I expect there to be more public opportunities to have input into that truck parking study in the coming months. The Energy Efficient Logistics Grant is a project we're partnering with RPI on. It's a research-oriented projects on reducing energy related to related to trucks. The Smart Communities program, we currently have a Smart Communities toolbox developed to help develop some ideas for integrating technology to help make the transportation system more efficient. That project should be wrapping up at the end of this year, but we'll be leading some implementation activities and some additional work related to smart communities in the coming year. Health impact assessments is another new topic for us. We recognize the relationship between transportation and public health, and I think we're going to be exploring health impact assessments as a potential tool that perhaps the transportation sector can utilize in the region to document benefits and impacts of transportation from a public health perspective. Capital Coexist is an ongoing safety program. We're transitioning this program a little bit this year. We'll still have some opportunities for local police agencies to access educational resources for, say, a bicycle training or a bicycle rodeo event. But we're going to also expand this opportunity to allow for demonstration projects of related to transportation. So that could include something like a bike lane demo on a local street, maybe even a bus lane demonstration on a local street. So some resources will be attached, available to local governments there to implement a demonstration project. ADA planning is a very important topic in which we continually work with local governments on meeting federal requirements and federal law. with respect to ensuring the transportation system is accessible to those with various differing abilities of using the system, whether you are visually impaired, mobility impaired, or have other impairments. So we put and do some work right now with the city of Albany. We'll be working and wrapping up a project in Saratoga Springs, but we'll be hiring a consultant to continue to work with local governments to inventory their assets and develop ADA transition plans in those communities. Active transportation planning is sort of a rebranding activity related to our bicycle and pedestrian planning work. So we're sort of expanding the definition to include more modes like shared bicycle facilities, ride sharing programs, different scooters, e-scooters, e-bikes. So different modes of transportation beyond just traditional walking and biking are going to be now part of the active transportation planning work that we do here at CDTC. We're also working on some implementation tasks related to our Capital District Trails Plan. We'll be partnering with Albany County on a small initiative to further explore the feasibility of a loop trail through the New Carner Road, Watervliet Shaker Road area of Albany County. We're also working on the completion of the Patroon Creek Greenway Trail, which is a trail that's going to basically run east-west along the I-90 corridor in Albany County from the Hudson River and the Livingston Avenue Bridge out to Rensselaer Lake. We also continue to support the Clean Communities Program, which is actually US DOE, Department of Energy funded program that promotes electric vehicles, electric vehicle education, implementation of electric vehicle infrastructure. And so we'll continue to partner with US DOE on our Clean Communities Program that CDTC hosts. Moving along, we have one of our big federally required program areas, which is our Transportation Improvement Program. As I said at the beginning, we're in the midst of updating our TIP for the 2022-2027 fiscal years. As part of that TIP update, we'll be having a public comment period likely sometime in April or May of this year as we adopt a new TIP in June. As part of that work, we have to do air quality conformity. So we have requirements under the Clean Air Act in which we look at the potential impacts of these transportation projects with respect to air quality. Generally speaking, the vast majority of these projects are exempt because they actually benefit and improve the air quality. But on occasion, we have to note ones that may not or may potentially have a negative impact, and the air quality conformity process handles that part of that requirement. Travel demand modeling services is a rebranding of a line item that we have available to local governments. This is where, again, local government could request some support for traffic modeling on their local system. We offer the same services to NYSDOT, New York State Department of Transportation, through the TIP project development support line. That's typically for larger projects that DOT is leading that we need to undertake some transportation modeling for. The planning emphasis areas are required through the FTA side of our planning activities. These are items that are related to Human Service Agency transportation, which are mobility providers. Our transit planning initiatives that we partner with CDTA on, our transportation demand management or TDM initiatives, which are initiatives that seek to reduce our dependence on single occupant vehicles and increase transportation options in the region. In addition, we have our safety planning activities here related to reducing fatal and serious injury crashes. And we've rebranded our security planning initiative to include resiliency planning to make sure that our transportation system is as resilient, or we're planning for a longer term resiliency to address flooding, make sure that our transportation system can be as resilient as it can be. Some additional activities that we have funded for and proposed for funding this year, for next year, I should say, include our continued ongoing relationships with the town of Colony and the town of Malta. They both have what is termed a generic environmental impact statement, in which the towns have any development that gets proposed in a GEIS study area. We review the transportation impacts of those development proposals and provide an accounting of the potential mitigation that could be requested by the towns to those developers for the transportation impacts. We're also working on a statewide project on behalf of our statewide planning association on shared transit service planning and analytics, which is really a fancy way of saying looking at data resources to better undertake transit service planning. So that's an ongoing initiative that will be a multi-year project. That's why the dollar value is so large on that one. The remaining topics here in this list are what we call our linkage program planning activities. The Menands, Scotia, East and North Greenbush, Troy, and City of Rensselaer projects are projects that have been initiated, are underway, in many cases somewhat underway, some are just beginning, but they'll carry into the next fiscal year. And then the three new ones that I mentioned at the beginning for the town of Brunswick, the village and town of Colony, the city of Schenectady, will be added as new projects to be launched in 2022. So how much money is available in the UPWP? So we have, as I said, our primary fund sources are the FHWA Metropolitan Planning Funds, as well as our FTA planning funds. We have some additional funds from statewide contributions, from local governments, from US DOE. All of these funds add up to about just over $5 million. A lot of that funds our staff time, it funds consultant work, it funds some other activities that we're involved with. But it's a fairly large number. But even with that, it still doesn't accomplish everything that we would like to accomplish in a given year. So next steps, as I said, we've opened this public comment period through Wednesday, March 2nd. At that time, we'll respond to comments and revise the draft Unified Planning Work Program document and present the final draft to our policy board for approval on March 3rd. And you're probably wondering, how can I submit comments? If you have any comments, questions, or suggestions, you can reach us by emailing cdtc@cdtcmpo.org. You can send comments via regular mail to CDTC, 1 Park Place, Albany, New York, 12205. You can also leave a voicemail or text your comments to area code 518-313-0384. You can post ideas and suggestions on our social media. And if you were listening in, or you know someone who might be interested in learning more about us and what our planning activities are for the coming year in another language, you can call our office at 518-458-2161 and request information in another language. So with that, that is all I had to share with you today. We're happy to answer any questions or comments. Jen, my colleague, has placed in the chat pod the location on our website of the primary documents that I reviewed today, as well as an executive summary. And if you have any questions, I'd be happy to try to answer them right now. And feel free to raise your hand or type your questions in the chat pod. I'm not seeing any questions. Okay. The question from Ethan is, is there a timeline for each of the linkage projects to begin? Yes, so the three new ones cannot begin until after April 1st. They typically last up to 20 months from the point that the contracts, the memorandum of understanding is signed by the community. We usually sign the MOU in April or May as soon as we can. We develop a scope of work for the consultants over the summer and typically begin publishing and seeking consultant assistance in the latter part of the summer, with a consultant coming on board in the fall to begin the actual work on the project. So that's a typical timeline. The other ones that have already begun, Jen, if you could put in the chat pod the status of planning activities, and it'll give you an estimated time of completion and some resources in terms of the ongoing projects, such as project websites and a basic description of the status of those projects. Hopefully that answers your question, Ethan. Great. Are there any other questions or comments? Okay, I'm not seeing any. So if there's no other questions or comments, I'll just share my screen one more time with the methods you can use to communicate with us in terms of the status of if you want to submit comments. Again, you can email us at cdtc@cdtcmpo.org. There's various, you can mail us or call us. And hopefully you found this workshop informative and helpful. And thank you for participating and listening in today. We look forward to hearing from you soon. Thanks, everybody.
Sandy, there is one question that just popped up in the Q&A about whether Brunswick got the grant.
So the town of Brunswick, it's proposed to be getting the grant. It'll officially get the policy board will approve it at its March meeting, and that's when it will officially be funded. Any other questions? Okay. Well, then hearing none, thanks again, everyone, and have a good rest of your day. Thanks, everybody.